What does it mean to know thyself? Welcome to Philosopher's Corner. I'm John. What does it mean to know thyself? It's one of the fundamental maxims in philosophy, and it's generally regarded as one of the more fundamental and important pieces of wisdom just in life in general. So what does it mean to know thyself? Well, the obvious overarching answer is that it means that one should place oneself as the subject of thorough examination, both for external behavior and for inner life, for character traits, for patterns of thought, for emotional transmission and reception, for value systems, and really for any type of interest in human examination. We should use ourselves as the test bed for judgment in regards to human behavior and character analysis and insight before we start examining other people. So find the faults in ourselves and find the strengths in ourselves before we start subjecting other people to our investigations, so to say. And that's easy enough. I think most people get that. It's start with yourself before you start looking at other people. And in that process, we actually figure out what we're looking for in other people. And we start figuring out our own values. And like we find out by examining ourselves, we start to come to determinations about what it is that we would like to see in other people, or what it is we're looking for in other people. There's no one path for it once it begins. Then it can spread out into all these different paths. So philosophically, and we can cover the whole spectrum of human behavior with philosophy, but like philosophically, why are we doing it? Why did it be like for all these really deep inner thinkers who become philosophers, why did knowing thyself become so important? They could have just as easily, picked a test case and said like, oh, no, this guy, right? And that's kind of what some religions do. They'll have a send up of a person and they'll say, oh, well, study this particular person because they got it right. But in philosophy, it's an inner introversional study. So know thyself. Well, when we start to get into it, for sure, the external stuff sort of speaks for itself. When we start to examine our own behavior, that seems to let us know who we are, which is important, so that we know how we're interacting in the world, so that we understand our cause and effect, which in turn, at that point, also starts to trigger self-awareness. And that seems to be a universal human phenomenon. That when we start to take conscious accountability of ourselves and acknowledge who we actually are in this world, that is what catalyzes the process of self-awareness. And self-awareness is a trip that has all sorts of benefits in and of itself. That really begins the development process for a human being. So that's just step one of knowing thyself, is that knowing thyself is the process of becoming self-aware, making the unconscious conscious, starting a path of acknowledgement. And I'd say that begins the calibration of self as an instrument of divining truth in the world. I'll say it again. That begins the process of calibrating self as an instrument of truth in the world, which is the chief aim of philosophy. To be able to find yourself in a world, a seemingly chaotic world, and discover the order within it, discover the underlying principles that organize this world, the animus of it. But that search is undoable. You can't even begin that search unless the philosopher, the human in this case, has done a thorough self-examination to understand what calibration we are, so that we can measure the results that we're getting from the external world. We have to know ourselves inside and outside to a very high degree of accuracy before we can start truly trusting the information that we're getting back from the reality. Now, as we go deep into Know Thyself, what scientists and mystics and sages and messiahs and all these other people have told us is that within the human system, in the inner life, we house a microcosm of the macrocosm of the universe. That during meditation and other forms of inner journeying, we have within us the ability to essentially study the external universe internally. So there'll be a phase of knowing thyself where we go through the regular physical examinations of ourselves, the biological examinations of ourselves, the sort of external interaction versions of ourselves, the psychological examinations of ourselves. And then when we've done all that, then we start to get into the inner examination of ourselves. You know, and the intellect is a great place to begin that inner examination, which is why knowledge and education and correct information and being in charge of our thoughts and aware of our thoughts is so important in this process. Because as we begin the inner examination, then we're truly going to see who we are. In a way, the external examination of self is just, if the inner self is the tree of life, then the external version of ourselves are just the fruits of that tree. So when we get to the inner examination, we're truly seeing who we are. Then we're really getting to know thyself when we start to get in. And that's the area where we determine what our thought patterns are. That's the area where we determine what our value systems are. It's the area where we determine at the most intimate level how we're interacting with reality. And as it turns out, according to tons of other human beings who've done this journey, we have a microcosm of the universe within ourselves. So by doing the inner journey, and the inner journey becomes clear once we've resolved and gotten clarity on who we are as an individual, and once we've come to terms with who we are, like pros and cons, and honestly, on the journey of inner self, that is what catalyzes us to engage in healing activities and compensatory activities, and become real with ourselves and know our pros and cons, limits and life, strengths and liabilities, all those things. And then, so when we gain access to the inner self and the inner journey, which is also where philosophy resides, then we can start to bring these uniquely human skills to bear in the journey for truth and wisdom, which is what philosophy is. And lo and behold, when we get inside, the inner workings of ourselves, we find that that's a universal experience in regards to other humans. And it also happens to be the universe, at least if you believe all the great thinkers in history. And so when we get in there, now the real deep end of the philosophical journey begins. Everything else is pretty much preparation, because you really do have to be, you have to know yourself in order to be comfortable with yourself, right? And once you go inner, as we know, we're in a vibrational, observational universe, and we're vibratory beings in a vibratory environment. And the inner portion is where the very fine mechanics of our inner vibratory self exist. And so when we get in there, it's kind of a clean room, you know? You gotta be aware that when you go in there, that you can adjust things in yourself through observation. That's what quantum tells us, that the observer can affect the thing being observed. Well, you're getting down into those like quantum realms, you're getting down into those soul realms, those vibe realms within ourselves. And when we're in there, we really need to be comfortable as much as possible with ourselves before we start journeying inward, because we're invariably going to see new things about ourselves, good and bad. Or, you know, it's best to really leave judgment at the door, but things that we'll see, things that explain why we're so good at things, and then we'll see things that explain like why we have lapses or shortcomings in our life, you know? And that's the area where we can get into, where while we're knowing ourselves, we can also fix ourselves or heal ourselves or change our value systems. I know I've, throughout my life, you know, live life, get data, examine my behavior, determine some things about myself, and then go inward and go, oh yeah, well, I had that value system, that didn't really work out. Let's change that around. Oh, and then go back out and live more life, and then come back with more real life data and go, oh, okay, that was a good adjustment. That all happens on the inner journey. And the inner journey is a process of knowing thyself. So when we get in there and we penetrate through all, even the personal, individual things that we're looking for in the inner journey of knowing thyself, then the non-self-centered portion of the Know Thyself trip opens up, which is that it turns out that the universe does exist within each of us in whatever capacity you can process that. You know, you can't drink from the fire hose all at once. You get the pieces that you can handle, and then you continue down that path. And then as one continues down that path and they trust it and they can verify the information and the correlation between the inner journey and the external conscious life changes, and one can establish for oneself that it's a true connection, that really is happening. It's not just a figment of your imagination, that you really are interacting with your value systems in an internal, sensitive manner. Then when the sort of self-centered, you know, egotistical sort of like examinations resolve themselves to a certain amount of clarity, then the universal principles of it start to open up, that do reside within each of us. And then really through the, even if that's just the level that you get to, just to discover that these universal principles reside within self, then that helps us relate to everybody else, because then we go, well, I'm a human being, and every human being has a universal constitution. You know, we're a biological entity coming off a biological factory line, essentially, that nature made. And then you go, oh, well, this is in each one of us. So each one of us contains the universe, or the access through inner journeying to a version of the universe within each of us. And then that process alone is enough of an epiphany, especially when the person has done it of their own accord and they have validated it each step of the way, to go, whoa, that should catalyze a level of compassion for other humans that should be irreversible to know, because now you know. Through examination of self, through knowing thyself, not only do you know thyself, but now you know that thyself is also other selves. And that alone is enough of a consciousness raiser and brings from the unconscious into the conscious a level of understanding and connection that can't be refuted. And when that occurs, that opens up a whole philosophical level for examination. And I believe that that is what opens up the level of free communication and exchange with other philosophers who have gotten deep enough to know thyself to get to that level, that brings it to the most utilitarian level of philosophical journeying. Because now that person, when you get to that level, is now at a level where they can truly and freely share discoveries and principles and thoughts with others who have also endeavored to know thyself and then discovered the universal nature of self. And now you can meet people on a level of consciousness who have done that, that really allows for much smoother transfer of information, because the more egotistical, self-centered aspects of the journey of being an individual in a human body have been processed and resolved to a point of clarity to know, yeah, okay, those are all my individual features, but I have universal features. And those in the when you make the universal features of self the center of gravity, especially for philosophical discussions with other people who are doing likewise, then great progress can be made. Progress that far exceeds what one can do when they're stuck in the shell of egotistical self. In order to destroy or gain mastery over the egotistical version of oneself, one has to know thyself. And that's a process that then, where you take ownership of self, and then it slowly dissolves the shell of the ego. And then as the shell of the ego hatches, the soul, the universal soul of self hatches out of the egotistical shell. And then, then we're truly born as our soul self. And we can understand that that's a human design. It's not even personal. That's just a human design. And then we understand that the journey is a self-guided one of self-awareness and consciousness and deep examination. And it's kind of funny that that process is very egotistical and self-centered, and that the reward for it is that you can cast aside self after one knows thyself, and you have a handle on self and self-mastery. Then you can cast aside self. The reward for knowing thyself is you can cast aside self and be more universal in nature. And then that frees one up to also engage with other people who are universal in nature and know thyself. And also it allows you to rise above those who do not know thyself and are sort of mired in the egotistical journey, either consciously or unconsciously. But it also allows us to have tremendous deep compassion for them, because now we understand what the process is. So in knowing thyself, one ends up learning the universal process, and then also understanding that it's not personal. In fact, that it is a universal human condition that we're born into. And that's not just my opinion or philosophical thought. That's a commonly held perspective from great thinkers throughout history and throughout the earth. And obviously I've come into realization of myself, and I can vouch for its validity. And essentially the goal for human evolution begins with that. So people got to know themselves, and then they're ready to deal with other people. And in learning to know thyself, that breeds compassion and self-awareness, and the process for evolution, which is bringing the unconscious and the conscious through acknowledgement, and then emotionally processing it, because emotional processing is the engine for this evolution. No matter how much head work we do, no matter how much intellectual brain work we do, the emotional processing in a vibratory reality is what actually puts those factors into play in our life. So when we can do all of those things through knowing thyself, then that frees us up to be less egotistical and more universal in a better balance of navigating this life. And which the life we know is, it's a material realm that has a vibratory spiritual aspect to it. And so in order for us to find harmony with our environment, we also needed to explore the material nature of ourselves, but also while being a spiritual being in a vibratory reality. And knowing thyself is the process of doing that. So, well, obviously, I'm sure there's a lot more to say on the subject. It'd be great if you feel free, obviously, populate the comment section with whatever you like. And I hope you found this helpful. The more you look, the more you'll see. Think free, be free. Thanks for spending some time here at Philosopher's Corner. Have fun. Know thyself.